So a progressive running for Congress as an independent named Tim Canova that was challenging Debbie Wasserman Schultz for her seat is now filing a lawsuit to have the election redone because he alleges all sorts of misdoings and fraud occurred. Now, this happened to occur in, you guessed it, Broward County, where Brenda Snipes is accused to have done all sorts of shady things. I first heard of Canova last year when he did the Jimmy Dore show, which, for those of you who haven't checked it out, Jimmy Dore and me would be quite oppositely aligned politically and philosophically on a lot of things. He's a progressive, a big Bernie fan, socialist Democrat type person, but I think he's hilarious and his show on YouTube is fantastic. He's an independent voice, so even if I disagree with him, we do happen to agree on a lot of things about why the hegemony of the mainstream news and the establishment parties are not a good thing. So I do follow him a lot and I enjoy his show, even if we would have disagreements. Anyways, he had Mr. Canova on, and Canova talked about running against Wasserman Schultz as a Democrat in the 2016 primary. And all sorts of shady things happened. He ended up losing by Debbie by 13 percentage points, and so he didn't challenge the results of the election. However, he wanted to see the results, which he's legally entitled to, so he wanted to have not necessarily a recount, but just the count verified. And Brenda Snipes, as you may have heard, actually destroyed a bunch of the paper ballots, making a verification of the results impossible. And so he says he regrets that he didn't challenge this, but he basically raised questions like, why were they allowed to destroy these paper ballots? That's against the law. A judge found that, yes, it was against the law. But as always, in situations such as these, no one was prosecuted. There were no criminal charges brought about. So we have no idea what the results are. And in that election in 2016, his own internal polls had him showing much closer to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which is why it seemed odd that he ended up losing by 13%, which is like, oh, cool, can I have the results verified? And they weren't able to be verified. So I'll link below that video to Jimmy Dore. He's also on more recently with Jimmy Dore, which I'll link that video as well. But today, Canova's campaign is releasing information that they are going to be filing this lawsuit. And here, I'll read some of his letter that he wrote. Tim Canova, an independent candidate in Florida's 23rd Congressional District, has filed a motion for a court to invalidate the results of the 2018 general election and declare a new election shall proceed with hand-marked paper ballots that are counted in hand by public and reported immediately and publicly to the local precinct level. In the details of Canova's court filing, Broward County Election Supervisor Brenda Snipes is alleged to have engaged in misconduct that was sufficient to change or place in doubt the results of the 2018 election. Now, this is me again. Keep in mind, he was already basically had questions with this same situation, running against Debbie Wasserman Schultz with Brenda Snipes, engaged in all sorts of nefarious activities in 2016. So now he runs as an independent, and he's going through the exact same situation. The article continues. Canova cites Snipes, Dozel Spencer, the SOE Director of Voting Equipment, and other deputy supervisors violated their oaths and to faithfully perform their duties, engaged in repeated misconduct and violations of state and federal laws. Specifically, I'll link below so you could read the entire complaint yourself, but here is what I found most interesting. The certification of the purported 2018 election results is based on inadequate and incomplete information, and therefore is invalid certification of those results. More specifically, approximately 98,000 votes are reported by Snipes to have been cast for Schultz without any indication as to how and when those votes were cast. To date, Snipes has not provided any information about where these 98,000 votes came from. I mean, this is amazing. Now, again, it showed, polls were all showing that Canova and Schultz were basically tied. But at the end of the day, in Broward County, where Schultz's friend, Debbie Wasserman Schultz's friend, Brenda Snipes, is running the show, Canova only got 5% of the vote, despite polling showing that he was in a statistical tie with Schultz. Now, again, if you've seen my videos before, you know that I don't necessarily trust polls, but to be off that much is incredibly suspicious. And then when you take into account the fact that this is the second time in a row it's happened, we know that we've seen, found video evidence of Brenda Snipes actually campaigning for Schultz weeks before the election. And then she destroyed paper ballots, which was against the law in 2016 when the election results were questioned and wanted to be verified. And now this time just magically 98,000 votes come up, and she won't give any explanation of where these votes came from. And there's other things such as videos that show that the chain of custody of paper ballots was lost, that it was inappropriately put in inappropriate vehicles, that there were problems with the voting machines, all sorts of things. So what I find interesting about this is actually someone, again, I'm not a progressive. I would be ideologically far away from the progressives, though we do agree on that the establishment parties in the Republican and Democratic Party both have a lot of problems. This is actually a progressive, much like Jimmy Dore, whose show he was on, who's actually out there trying to fight against the establishment instead of just working with the establishment, pushing like the Russia story, saying we need to trust the CIA and things of that nature. These are what real progressives should be, that they're saying like, well, now wait, you cheated Bernie. You're cheating other real progressives. This is unacceptable. We need to make sure that these results are verified. The other thing that I think is funny about this is the Democrats constantly harp on things like voter suppression and trying to steal elections and the problems with gerrymandering. Now, the voter suppression, I think, is mostly garbage because it's basically saying that asking to have voter ID is somehow voter suppression, which I heavily disagree with. But the gerrymandering, I agree with. I think that it is ridiculous that people in both parties, but it seemed to happen a lot in the Republican Party, which I'm a member of, gerrymandered these districts. For those of you who don't know, that just means they draw up the districts to look like jigsaw puzzles instead of just like a normal square circle like you'd expect. And they do that so Republicans are guaranteed to win this district and Democrats are guaranteed to win this district instead of having like a fair election result. So Democrats are quick to harp on that, and I agree with. But then when something like this occurs, and the first Jimmy Dore video I'll leak with Canova explains how Bernie got screwed in New York in the 2016 election, where hundreds of thousands of progressive voters were taken off the rolls at the last minute and were unable to cast a vote, which could have hurt Hillary Clinton. So it seems like the establishment Democrats are equally as willing to engage in shady election practices to get elected, and the media is silent on it. The same media that wants to constantly harp on voter suppression and things in other areas are silent when the Democrats are doing it. So it's nice to see, even if I would disagree with a lot of Mr. Canova's policy prescriptions, I feel that he's entitled to a fair shake like anyone else, and that the fact that this is the second time that we've seen these shady behaviors with Brenda Snipes in Broward County just goes to show that a lot of these Democrats, at least at the establishment level, I'm not talking about you that may be watching this, the individual Democrat, but the establishment people in the Democratic Party, they're not interested in having a fair vote system, and they're not interested in counting all votes and making sure everything's on the up and up like they constantly have been claiming. That's what they were claiming in Florida, right, and other places. So it's not that simple, and it seems that they are willing to engage in corruption. And if it happened against a progressive here, what's to say it couldn't be happening all over the country? The fact is that there are a lot of shady things that occur with elections, and we should have a system where it should be independently, publicly verified, the votes be counted, so we don't have these sorts of questions. Every year, it seems like in Florida now, every election, there's all these questions. Now there's questions in California where a bunch of districts, the end of election night, seem to be going for Republican, but then due to new laws that say that third parties could submit ballots for people, not just family members, all of a sudden, unexpectedly, there were tons of votes that came in from the Democrats after the election day, and that pushed it in the Democrats' favor. I believe it was in North Carolina, there's allegations that there was one county that may have swung a vote towards a Republican because there was some sort of fraud occurring. We shouldn't be having these problems in a first world country like the United States. But again, everyone wants to be silent on it when it's benefiting their side. And I think that both sides, sometimes these allegations of fraud would end up benefiting both sides. And both sides should take this more seriously and focus on eliminating this fraud. And what's been going on with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Brenda Snipes in Broward County is appalling. It should outrage everyone, even if you're a Democrat. And remember, I say this all the time, when we're talking about like the weaponization of the intel agencies and investigative agencies, they're going to be used to go after progressives, people on the left that are anti-establishment, just like they were used to go after Trump, who's considered not even really on the right, but more on the right, and was thought to possibly have been anti-establishment. So this is just another example how they don't want third-party voices in there. They don't want independents or people that are running Republican or Democrat that want to buck the establishment line. So kudos to Tim Canova, even though I wouldn't agree with a lot of his stances politically, for doing the right thing, challenging these results, and actually standing up instead of just, wearing a pink-colored hat or something and shouting resistance, actually doing something to resist the establishment and the corruption that could come with it. All right, have a good one.